Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Music Den. I am your host Armando Venditti, and I hope you guys are having a fantastic morning. It's a beautiful sunny morning here in Edmonton, and I hope you guys, wherever you are having a great day. In this episode of the Music Den, I'm going to be doing a top three album ranking of an artist that has had releases in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. But well, for this ranking, I was gonna originally do five albums. One album from the 70s on. The 60s, for me, their output wasn't really that great. I really didn't get into their stuff um, from that decade. But I realized that once I looked at the stuff, at the catalogs, that their albums, although they were good in the other decades, the 70s output from this artist uh, far outweighs and is, in my very humble opinion, far superior to their album output in other decades, in the following decades. So I have picked three albums from this artist from the 70s that I feel, for me, not only were they very different from one another, but they were very innovative, and the albums themselves are quite strong. The artist is David Bowie. Now, David Bowie was born David Robert Jones on 8th of January, 1947, and passed away, unfortunately, 10th of January, 2016, 2 days after the release of his most recent album, Black Star. Um, so David Bowie, how can I put this? David Bowie, from the beginning of his career, probably from the, well, I should say, probably from the 70s on, has always been referred to as the chameleon, sorry, of rock. Every album that he had done from the 70s onward seems to have been different in some way. Like he always seemed to have reinvented himself. Probably because he never liked to do things the same. Like he never liked to repeat himself. His 70s output had to be his most prolific time period. He was signed to RCA in 1971. Prior to that, he was signed to Mercury Records in the US, or no, sorry, in the UK. And in 1970 released The Man Who Sold the World, which in the US and North America was a modest hit. He subsequently signed to RCA in 1971 out of New York City and released Hunky Dory, which featured the tracks Queen Bitch, and also the major hit from the album Changes. Also contained the track Andy Warhol, etc. And a, a moderate hit. It wasn't as big of a hit as he wanted it to be. And he had signed with manager Tony DeFries, who purposely did not want the album to be a major hit because he felt that Bowie had not developed himself yet to be the star that he could be. He wanted to hold off a little bit, which I don't know. I don't find that to be conducive to a manager slash musician or artist relationship. I mean, who does not want their artist to be successful right out of the gate when they first sign them? So I don't get that. But for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to be ranking, again, my top three albums from Bowie from the 1970s. Now, coming in at number three is Heroes. Heroes was released in 1977. The second in what was to be called the Berlin Trilogy, produced by Tony Visconti, with 10 tracks. This was the second collaboration that Bowie did with Brian Eno, ex of Roxy Music. Brian Eno, as you all know, probably do know that at that point he was also a prolific songwriter and was releasing instrumental albums on his own, and uh, just met up with Bowie in the mid 70s, and they got along great and struck up a friendship, and they wanted to work together. So for this album, as they did with Low, the few months previous, because both Low and Heroes were released in 1977. What Bowie and Eno wanted to do, according to Bowie, was that they wanted to create a new language for songwriting, which meant that they used a lot of synthesizers and different keyboards to create a different sort of musical palette, if you will. Their work was, I call it ambient based, in terms of a lot of different keyboard textures and synthesizers, like work with synthesizers and sort of I call it, I guess, keyboard landscapes. They bought the most latest synthesizers that were being used at the time, and according to Bowie, what they did was they threw the handbooks away and just started playing with these synthesizers, because they had all these pre-programmed sounds and well, I guess you call them textures in all the keyboards. So they just started experimenting. And with Low, what you had was a very minimalist approach in terms of the recording. There was a lot of space on the album, but there was also a lot of use of keyboards and textures and soundscapes that they wanted to continue with Heroes, but Heroes was more of a song-based album. I mean, Heroes contained the massive hit title track, Heroes. It also featured, the album was produced by Tony Visconti, and it featured such players as Carlos Alomar, who worked with Bowie as far back as Young Americans in 75. He continued to work with Bowie all throughout his career. But for this album, he was featured prominently on the album. Along with Carlos Alomar on Heroes, you had Robert Fripp from King Crimson. He had come out, Robert Fripp had basically retired at this point. And Bowie and Eno called him, basically, literally, grab his guitar and come take a flight, that they would pay for it, take a flight to where they were in Germany and record some guitar parts for them, which thought was a bit, Fripp thought was a bit odd, but nevertheless, he did it. So they worked with him. He worked with them on this album. Sorry. It's only been 2 coffees for me today, guys, so I'm a little bit rusty right now. I'm doing the best I can. Along with the title track, you had songs like Joe the Lion, Beauty and the Beast. The 3 main instrumentals on the album were, V2 Schneider, Moss Garden, and Sense of Doubt. Now, V2 Schneider, it starts off side 2 on the vinyl release, because I remember I had the vinyl release back in the 90s. Somebody lent it to me. Never did give it back to them, but there you go. And it comes in with a swirling keyboard passage. And this track in particular, according to Bowie, was influenced by Kraftwerk. it's got to be said that at the same time, um, somebody brought in to Bowie. I do believe Bowie brought in this track to Tony Visconti, the track from Donna Summer, "I Feel Love," which came out in 1977 off of her "I Remember Yesterday" album. I had the album. Growing up with three sisters, you had different types of music in the house at all times. And that track in particular was all done by keyboards, produced by Giorgio Moroder, all done by keyboards. And again, that also had sort of a swirling intro keyboard passage. So that track was also very influential for Bowie. He believed that this was where music was going to. So he wanted to be a part of that. The again, Heroes was more of a song-based album with songs like, again, Joe the Lion, Beauty and the Beast, Heroes. So you had mixture of the song-based tracks along with more of the ambient song tracks like Moss Garden, Sense of Doubt, and V2 Schneider. So for me, this is out of the trilogy albums, being Low, Heroes, and Lodger in 79. Heroes is the one album that I always go back to. So that's number 3. Number 2 is Station to Station. Released in 1976. Now, you gotta remember at this point in his career, Bowie, again, signed to RCA. According to his contract, or according to most of the contracts at this time, but according to his contract, Bowie was obligated to release 2 albums a year and to release a single every 30 days, depending on whatever album he was promoting. So if you got to think about that, that's a lot of pressure to put on one artist to come up with an album of 9 or 10 tracks and to have to release 2 albums a year and to have to release a single every 30 days. You had to have the creative juices flowing. Now, with Station to Station, this is an interesting album. Only contains 6 tracks on it, 3 per side. You had a mixture of styles. You had the experimentation of the title track. You had the R&B of the track Stay. You had almost like the R&B / disco track Golden Years. You also had the track TVC15, which that track itself is very hard to sort of pinpoint. Has a bit of a comedic approach to it, I call it. But I would put it within the R&B vein. You also had tracks like the ballad, fantastic ballad of Wild as the Wind, which ends the album. And I cannot think of a better way to end any album but with that ballad. I mean, his vocal delivery on it is very emotional, very emotive, also very soft in the beginning, very pleading almost, with lyrics like, love me, say you do. Let me fly away with you, for our love is like the wind. But the way he delivers it, it is so emotional. He is handing you his heart on a bloody plate, on a bloody tray, saying, "Here, take my heart, please. I have nothing else to give you but my heart." So that track for me makes the album. I mean, along with the experimentation of the title track, Station to Station, You have like the intro, which almost sounds like a helicopter landing, and then the drums and bass kick in, and that track alone has um, the has the basically three different sections to it. And with the opening lyric, the return of the thin white duke throwing darts in lovers' eyes. So I mean, that track again is a fantastic way to start the album, um, and um, the uniqueness of the track. There's nothing else on that album that's like that. So the uniqueness of that track alone is worth its weight in gold. So, and it should be said, um, Station to Station, along with Changes One Bowie, which was his compilation from '75, sorry, I'm not going to say one and only, but was the time when Bowie started to make money from his deal with RCA. And just to backtrack a little bit, Bowie was signed through with Tony DeFries, and Tony DeFries set up Main Man Management out of New York. Now, Bowie was always under the impression that he was a partner in Main Man Management. However, he come to realize around 75, after the Diamond Dogs tour, because the Diamond Dogs tour started out a very elaborate tour, but as the tour went on, parts of bits of the show were cut, and the sets for the show were skimmed down. Bowie realized as of 75 that he had no money to his name and no money to call his own. So starting with Changes One Bowie and Station to Station, he started to recoup money and make money from RCA. Also at that time, he broke away from Tony DeFries and got new management. So just a bit of a background on that. So that's number two. Coming in at number one, in some people's opinion, and in mine as well, this album has to be the quintessential Bowie album. And that is The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Released in 72, the album to RCA, the material for the album, sorry, goes back to 1971. He had released Hunky Dory, but he had also started writing material for for The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and Spiders from Mars. The album was produced by Ken Scott and recorded at Trident Studios. The album basically tells the story of a rock star it's loosely a concept album. It tells the story of a rock star that has come to Earth and basically has become popular and is performing and is enjoying all the adulation, but basically he is destroyed by his own success in the end. The album, for the longest time in the 80s, mid 80s, was hard to find through RCA, partly because the copies were no longer available in North America. I, for the longest time, tried to find an RCA copy while vinyl was still prevalent in the stores. I could not find a copy. The album, again, for many, sorry, is considered to be the quintessential Bowie album, with songs like 5 Years, Soul Love, Star, um, It Ain't Easy, which ends off side one, the title track, Ziggy Stardust, and Suffragette City, Moon Age Daydream, and the the ultimate track, Rock and Roll Suicide. So, and Bowie, when he created this album and this character of Ziggy Stardust, I mean, he had changed his look completely. He had cut his hair, dyed it reddish orange, more reddish, but more of a spiky, fuller haircut, wore outlandish clothes, almost like a space alien type of look, heavy makeup, and during some points of this tour, he would dress in kabuki costumes, and also, but to also help him realize this dream that he had for Ziggy Stardust, he had with him Mick Ronson. I was going to say Mark Ronson, who was a producer. No, Mick Ronson on guitar, who was a guitar virtuoso and classically trained guitarist and knew orchestral arrangements and all that. So he had the help of Mick Ronson in order to help him craft these songs and present them in such a way that he basically threw himself into this character of Ziggy Stardust, and he took the tour on the road, and they started playing theaters, small theaters. But by the end of the tour, which lasted like 18 months, and in the interim, between the first show and the last show, he had also recorded another album, Aladdin Sane, which he called it Ziggy Stardust on Tour. You know, basically songs that would talk about his experiences in America, like Panic in Detroit, Watch That Man, songs like that. But it all started with the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. This was the album that basically launched Bowie in the UK in the stratosphere. It was a grower in North America in terms of I think it peaked at number 72 when it was first released, but over the years it gained popularity and it's become a classic. So, and in terms of the song structures on the album, every song fits together. Every song goes into one another, and they fit together perfectly. And it does loosely tell the story of someone who basically wanted success, gained success, but could not deal with that success and basically self-destructed as a result of said success. But yeah, so to me, this album is my number one, and it best represents what Bowie was going to be tried to do. Sorry, with his music within the rock and roll arena. So at number 3, you had Heroes. Number 2, Station to Station, and number 1, you had The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and Spiders from Mars. So yeah, that's it for the show today. Hopefully you guys are having a great day. Please leave your comments down below, down there, and let me know what you think. Do you like these albums? Do you like Bowie? Do you like any of his catalog, depending on the decade? Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. And please hit like and subscribe and click the notification bell to keep you on top of any new content that I've got coming up. Just do a bit of a recap as a reminder. Sorry. Friday, I'm going to be taping a couple of shows, possibly 3 shows with Bill Schuster. We're going to be doing our top 5 albums of Supertramp, and possibly Bill's wife, Stacy, is going to be coming on to do a show with Bill and I, and we're going to be ranking our favorite albums from Pink. And we are also discussing doing top 3 albums from Billy Joel and Elton John. So please stay tuned for that. Hopefully you guys enjoy what I'm doing and you enjoy the content and what I'm trying to present to you. And please look after one another and yourselves. And I will be chatting to you very soon. Bye for now.